Gabby Barrett was born in 2014, an ordinary girl from Michigan. Blonde hair, a smile from ear to ear, a childish openness that was enough for everyone. Her parents separated, and it happens. At first, the girl was taken in by her grandmother. Everything was stable: cleanliness, order, regular checkups with a doctor. But then something strange happened. The guardianship decided to return Gabby to her mother, a woman who, even according to internal reports, had unstable living conditions, without official work, with a new partner, a criminal record. Why? Who signed this decision? Why did no one question this return? At first, these were small things, invisible to the eye of an outsider. The girl began to go outside less often. Then, she disappeared from the yard altogether. The curtains in the house were increasingly tightly drawn, even during the day. No laughter, no steps, no sound, as if someone had turned her off from life. Gabby almost never showed up at school. Over the course of several months, there were only a few visits. The teachers tried to contact the parents, but all they got was silence. The girl's medical record remained empty. No checkups, no vaccinations, no appointments. It was as if the child had simply dropped out of the system, and no one asked the question, why? This is a typical strategy for families where violence occurs. Isolation, completely cut off from the outside world. They close the windows. They don't let guests in. They stop answering calls. They don't need light, only shadow. Because shadow hides bruises. Because in shadow, no one will ask why the child is crying. The neighbors saw that something was wrong. They felt it. But can you blame them? What if it shows up? What if you interfere and you'll be wrong? And that's why they kept quiet. It's easier that way. It's safer that way. For an adult. Not for a child, but in this silence, in this confinement, the child gradually loses everything: contact, support, a sense of the world. She lives, but as if in a glass box, where no one sees her, hears her, protects her, where every day is fear, where touch does not bring affection, but pain. It was a cold January morning in Michigan, a normal day for thousands of other families. But in one home in suburban Saginaw, everything was different. There on the bathroom floor, police found the body of a 4-year-old girl, not moving, not alive. Her name was Gabby. The body was not neatly laid out or covered. She was lying as she fell, as if no one cared. No blanket, no attempt to call an ambulance, no sign of panic, just indifference, permeating every corner. The girl died alone, and that was the scariest thing. Her mother, Candace Diaz, and her partner, Brad Fields, did not report the tragedy. They did not call the hospital. They did not rush for help. Instead, they just left. They packed their things, got into their car, and drove away, as if you can run from a dead body, as if this was not a daughter, not a person, but a mistake you want to erase. Only this wasn't a mistake. It was an accumulation. Days without food, nights of fear, flying hands, and icy indifference. Death didn't come suddenly. It crept up on her slowly, almost unnoticed. It sat next to her at the table. It waited by the door. And at some point, it just stayed alone in the bathroom, like the final act of human indifference. At first, Diaz and Fields said it was an accident, that Gabby had scalded herself and they were scared. But the forensic experts saw something else. The burns on her body were only part of the picture. There were old bruises and traces of chronic malnutrition. Her body spoke louder than any words. It screamed, "I was tortured. I was unloved. I was left alone." The police took the phones, and there was no accident there, but cold calculation. The search history was terrifying. How to inflict pain without leaving a trace. How to break bones so that there were no bruises. In messengers, phrases that make it hard to breathe. Anger, alienation, indifference. The child became an irritant, a burden. It was not a breakdown, not a mistake. It was a decision, consistent and cynical. Like in horror films, only without special effects, only reality. Candace Diaz is a young mother with a history of addiction, breakdowns, emotional instability. Fields has a criminal record, diagnoses, and a tendency toward violence. Together, they created a cocktail in which a child could not survive, where every day is danger, where fear is the only companion. And there were adults nearby, neighbors, social workers, teachers, and all of them were silent. And you? Would you have noticed if this was happening downstairs? The trial was short. Candace Diaz pleaded guilty to manslaughter, cruelty, and neglect of basic parental duties. She was sentenced to 30 to 60 years. Brad Fields, who showed no remorse, no attempt to explain himself, received life in prison, no chance of reduction, no chance of ever living free again. The courtroom was almost empty. A few journalists, a couple of child welfare workers, a distant relative. No one applauded, no one shouted, no one cried. Everything happened with restraint, as if it was not a question of human life, but a formality. The verdict was pronounced, and it became quiet, too quiet. There were no loud headlines after the trial. The news reported and forgot. A day later, everything moved on to other topics. But those who knew Gabby continued to live with the feeling that the story was not over. Because the trial is not the end. It is just a period on paper. And in reality, everything goes on. The employees of the guardianship authorities underwent internal checks. Some resigned, some stayed and simply became more cautious. Relatives who once could not influence the decision to transfer guardianship tried to understand where they went wrong. The people who made the decisions did not give interviews. They did not argue, did not make excuses. They simply remained silent. When the trial is over, the cameras are turned off, the charges are heard for the last time. Life goes on, but in a different way. The relatives who knew Gabby are left with a void that cannot be filled. Relatives try to move on, each in their own way. Some withdraw, some on the contrary begin to talk about what happened, about the pain, about the guilt that comes even to those who seemingly did nothing. Gabby's story became an impetus for rethinking in society. It reminded, even in a prosperous country with laws and services, there are still places where children suffer unnoticed. People began to notice more often, to listen more attentively. Funds organized by ordinary people appeared. Someone began collecting clothes for disadvantaged families. Someone began giving lectures on the signs of domestic violence. It was a quiet movement without loud slogans, but with real actions. Gabby's story has not disappeared. Her photos are still kept on the phones of those who did not have time to help. Who would like to turn back time? Who now looks differently? At neighbors, at children in the yard, at themselves. And in this, a small but real movement forward. Where there was once silence, now there is a voice. It sounds calmly, without accusations, but with confidence. It is no longer possible to remain silent. And even if it is quiet, it is already changing the world. This was the episode of Case 99, a place where true crimes are told not for the sake of shock, but for the sake of understanding. If you watch to the end, thank you. And if after this you become a little more attentive to what is happening around you, then we did not tell this story in vain. Until the next case.